Hi everyone, it's Connie from FAFF Designs. I am a brand ambassador for Dixie Belle Paint and I'm based in the UK. In the video you're about to watch, I'm going to paint these drawers behind in a sort of boho scheme with one of the brand new Dixie Belle transfers. Okay, so first things first, I'm going to whiz through the prep because there was quite a lot of it for such a dinky little piece. First things first, I took off all of the handles, and I'm not going to use the handles because I'm not a fan of them. Then I gave it a really good clean with Dixie Belle's White Lightning and rinsed that off with clean water afterwards. This was a really dirty piece, so I made sure that I cleaned in all of the carcass of the little drawers and inside the drawers as well. It had a really good scrubbing because they were really dirty. So next I went in with my sander and gave it a really good sand. You'll notice that I'm probably sanding a little bit more than what I usually do. I usually only give a piece of scuff sand, but the varnish on this was very thick and cracked, so I did take it right back to the wood grain underneath. This piece was likely to bleed, so I covered myself and used Dixie Belle's Boss in clear. It goes on slightly milky, but it dries perfectly clear, and that makes sure that it stops any bleed through from going through to the paint finish. And then I filled the hardware holes with Dixie Mud and sanded smooth. So that's the prep work done. I then applied a thick base coat of Dixie Belle's Daisy, which is a nice bright yellow, and my paint had gone quite thick in the container because I left the lid off, but that's okay because I wanted quite a thick textured base, and I wanted this yellow to peek through in areas. So once the Daisy had dried, I then went ahead with two colours after this. I'm using the same brush and I did double dip. I must admit I did double dip, but it's the kind of look that I want. And apologies for the lighting. We have about 2 hours of daylight in the UK in the winter. That's an exaggeration, but the lighting is pretty poor. So I was working with what I had. The colours that I am using now are Dixie Belle's Mermaid Tail, which looks a little bit bluer on the camera than what it is in real life, and I'm also then blending in Tree Frog Green, which makes a kind of a tealy colour. So I'm using my Mr. Bottle just to get the paint to blend a little bit, although I don't want it to be a proper mix, as in I haven't poured the two colours into a pot and mixed it thoroughly. I kind of want patches of green areas and patches where it's more blue, so that's the reason for me double dipping my brush, and that's the reason for me working in smaller areas so that I can kind of get that sort of blended boho-y kind of look that I'm going for. So just before I applied the second coat, I am just using a Dixie Belle sanding sponge to rub lightly over the surface just to make sure that my paint finish is smooth. And then I'm going back in with the same two colours that I used previously. I'm actually using a Belle brush in this instance, which is a natural bristle brush, which is going to give me a little bit more texture than what a synthetic brush would do. And I'm using my Mr. bottle again to just kind of get those colours to kind of melt together. Although I'm not looking for a perfect mix, I do want pockets of the tree frog green in some areas and little areas where the mermaid tail is more prominent. You'll notice that I'm doing all this with the drawers closed. Now that's because I want a cohesive look across the piece. I'm going to tidy the drawer edges up at a later date. You'll see me doing that later on in the video because it's for the particular look that I want. If I wanted a slightly different finish, if say for example if I was using silk, I would take all the drawers out and paint them individually, but for the purpose of this video I'm doing it with the drawers in situ. Okay, so I'm really happy with the colour so far, the blend, the turquoisey aqua colour that I've got. Now I'm going to add some depth and some definition to the drawer edges with Bunker Hill Blue. I'm applying this on top of dry paint. This paint underneath the mermaid tail in the tree frog green has been dried overnight. So it's completely dry. I'm not blending it into wet paint. And all I'm doing is I'm taking a dry premium chip brush and I'm adding the tiniest amount of Bunker Hill Blue because it is very pigmented, and I'm just adding a slight amount around the edges of the drawers and in the areas where I want to add a little bit of deepness and definition. I'm just working one drawer at a time, just around the edges for now, and I'm using my Mr. bottle with just tap water in it to soften that Bunker Hill Blue, that definition around the drawer edge, just using it ever so slightly to soften the edges and to make it a little bit more diluted so it's not such a harsh line. I've zoomed in a little bit for you here because what I'm going to do is introduce a little bit more daisy. So there are areas where you can see daisy, which is the base colour, the yellow, that I applied first. You can see areas where that is kind of poking through, but I just want it to be a little bit more prominent. So I'm just taking a palette knife with the teeniest bit of paint on, and I am just rubbing it over some of the edges and corners so that it kind of looks like the yellow is peeking through, but it's actually not, it's on top. And then I'm just going to soften it slightly by rubbing it back with a dry shop cloth. So you can see here, that's the amount of paint that I'm using. There's very, very little paint on the palette knife, and I'm just scraping it around the edges of the drawers to give a little bit of definition and make it look like that daisy is peeking through the blue. skip forward a little bit, I applied the daisy over the rest of the piece in a similar kind of way. You don't need to see me doing the whole thing. So I have little pockets of the yellow peeping through, which you can just see in that shot. And I am also, I told you I was going to tidy up the drawer edges afterwards. I'm just taking my electric sander and just sanding back that dark varnish on the lip of the drawers, because it just didn't look that nice. And I'm also going to just catch the edges of the drawers and distress them to give a kind of a bit more definition to around the drawer edges. Now we are truly onto the fun bit. So I am using Flower Child transfer, and I have already taken a portion of that transfer and cut it out for the top corner. I'm just trimming off the border so that I can get the pattern nice and flush to the top of the piece. And the way that you apply transfer is, when you finally found where you want it after positioning it 5,000 times, you remove the backing, place it on, and when you press it down, that's where your piece is going to be positioned. So I just press it out with my hands to begin with, and then I start rubbing with the transfer tool, which you get in the tube, and this is basically removing the image from the plastic sheet onto your piece of furniture. So when you've rubbed it all over with the transfer tool, grab a corner or an edge and start to lift that plastic backing up really carefully, rubbing as you go to make sure that the transfer is well and truly on your piece. And this one is quite detailed. It's got lots of little bits of flowers and foliage, so I'm just making sure all of those intricate edges are stuck down properly. See if you can spot my assistant there. She just popped in to pass me the knife, and I'm basically just really carefully slicing the transfer so that I can pull the drawers in and out. Where that pattern runs over the drawer edges, I'm just using a really sharp craft knife and just cutting through the design, and then I'm rubbing it around the edges with my finger so that the edges are stuck down. So I added another piece of the transfer to the bottom left of the drawers, and then before I sealed the piece, I'm just adding a little bit more Bunker Hill blue into certain areas just to add a little bit more definition. I'm using a dry bell brush, and I'm just using a very small amount of paint, being really careful not to go over the transfer because it isn't sealed yet. Okay, so when you're using a transfer on a piece, you need to make sure that you seal it. This stops it from getting rubbed off or damaged in use. So I am using Dixie Belle's Clear Coat Satin to give it a nice sheen. I'm applying it with the blue sponge, and I'm just going to apply two really thin coats to the entire piece. I added some more up-to-date handles, and the final step is I'm just going to add a very slight amount of Best Dang Wax in black. Again, just to add to a little bit of shading and definition to the drawers, I'm using a French tip brush, which is a natural bristle brush, and just feathering in a slight amount of that black wax just in certain areas to give a bit of depth. So here's the detail in the bottom left hand corner and the top right. You can just see the daisy peeping through slightly, and then here's the final shot. I love how this transfer works with these colours. Hope you like it. Thanks for watching the video, guys. If you've got any questions, drop them below, and make sure you're subscribing to Dixie Belle's YouTube channel.